Addiction is a universal problem in America, we don't have universal care to combat it. We're on the Titanic, and there are no seats in the lifeboats for the people in steerage. Soon, we'll all be underwater. That's why we haven't stopped the crisis in its tracks. The people who have the most power to make noise, call for help, and effect change get just enough help to maintain the status quo. The system is set up to privilege them, but that help does not trickle down. The rest of us are too poor, sick, and ashamed to take on the deeply flawed system that criminalizes addiction, pushes Big Pharma's agenda, and doesn't educate people about harm reduction or recovery options. We cannot stop a crisis that we do not understand. American Fix will help you understand what the opioid crisis is, why it is happening, who it affects, and how we can stop it. We must find a solution. This is our Black Plague. It's our AIDS crisis. It is real, and we are sinking fast. If we are going to survive, we cannot wait. It's easier to explain and express what's happening inside the opioid epidemic through personal stories. After all, we're not statistics. We're people. I walked into treatment for the last time on Thanksgiving Eve, 2014. It wasn't exactly a Kodak moment. I was terrified, exhausted, and sick of myself. My addiction had ruined every aspect of my life. I wasn't proud of who I had become. As I filled out the intake form, I swore I'd never speak about this moment or the years leading up to it ever again. I wanted to get help, get my life back together, and just move forward. I didn't ever want to think about what I'd been through, much less write a book about it. But as I began to heal from my addiction and lost some of the people closest to me to overdoses, I became more willing to share my experience. I learned that my story was a jumping-off point. It created connection and community. So I started reaching out, yet every time I spoke up, many people told me to keep my mouth shut. They said I had nothing to offer. They lectured me to wait until I was ready. But when would that day come? Ultimately, it wasn't up to them. It was up to me. I stopped waiting for permission to tell my story. And when I began speaking up, it opened the door for many others to do the same. However, my recovery didn't begin and end with me. If anything, it opened my eyes to the extreme difficulties my peers were experiencing. Recently, I found out that Mikey, one of my best friends who'd been sober for 3 years, had relapsed on heroin. He was kicked out of his sober living and was couch surfing. That hit me hard, right in the gut. Mikey was one of my first roommates in sober living. We were in rehab together multiple times, both trying for years to reach the other side of our addiction. Mikey just had a kid. Things were going really well for him, but then his relationship soured, and he picked up something to cope with his emotional pain. Without insurance, his options for treatment were incredibly limited. Although I talked to literally hundreds of people every day about their friends, kids, and family members, and speak to groups about recovery and advocate for policy reform, I was totally unprepared to deal with Mikey's relapse. I was dumbfounded. I panicked. I found Mikey and put him in touch with his mom, and only then did he feel comfortable asking for help. He was homeless, at the bottom again, but his voice was so ashamed and scared. I could tell what it had taken for him to actually admit he needed help. If Mikey hadn't made that call, if his mom hadn't talked to him first, if his family hadn't had the cash to cover part of his treatment, if he hadn't qualified for a scholarship at the rehab, if I hadn't been able to jump into my car and pick him up, what would have happened? What happens to people who don't have an immediate safety net in place? We know what happens. They don't make it. I have lost many friends to the disease of addiction, and each time, it's like another part of my heart is ripped out of my chest. It hurts, but there are certain friends, like Mikey, whose death would permanently alter me. My ability to love, to be close to others, would change forever. I didn't want to